Hello, and welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today, we're going to talk about the Groene family murders that occurred in 2005. Please like and subscribe. Now, let's begin today's story. Tracing the genesis of a monster. How a human being becomes a serial killer is a painful journey. Joseph Edward Duncan III wasn't born a monster. He was born on February 25, 1963, in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a military base, the fourth of 5 children born to an Army father and his mother. Because his father served in the U.S. military, Duncan's family was constantly moving, both domestically and overseas, relocating every 1 to 2 years. Until they settled in Tacoma, a sense of emotional roots or stability was difficult for Duncan to establish. Duncan's childhood was marked by these frequent moves and domestic instability. His mother was described as a very domineering woman, and after his arrest in 1980, Duncan claimed that he had been abused by his parents as a child. However, his younger brother vehemently denied these claims, casting doubt on the existence of domestic violence. Whatever the truth, Duncan's family fractured, with his parents separating in 1979 and divorcing in 1983. His older sisters left home as soon as they came of age, and Duncan remained with his mother before eventually joining his father and his new family. He attended Lakes High School but never received a diploma. Dropping out of school and failing to integrate into society, he was already descending into an uncontrollable darkness in his teens. The early years of a predator. Duncan's first recorded sex crime occurred in 1978, when he was just 15. He used a gun to threaten and rape a 9-year-old boy. The following year, he was arrested for driving a stolen vehicle, and the court adjudicated him as a juvenile delinquent, sending him to the Jesse Deslin Boys Ranch facility in Tacoma. There, he confided a more shocking truth to his therapist. Duncan claimed he had already tied up and sexually assaulted 6 boys and estimated he had raped a total of 13 young boys by the time he turned 16. This confession revealed that his paraphilia and pedophilic tendencies were deeply ingrained and extensive from his adolescence. But his criminal activity didn't stop there. In 1980, at the age of 17, Duncan stole several guns from a neighbor's house and committed a heinous crime, kidnapping a 14-year-old boy and raping him at gunpoint. This crime resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. Despite the long term, Duncan served only 14 years and was released on parole in 1994. The system failed to rehabilitate and reform him. Duncan simply sharpened his vengeful edge and cultivated resentment towards society during his incarceration. A decade of unsolved crimes. After his parole in 1994, Duncan drifted through various locations in the Seattle area. He remained a violent sex offender. In 1996, he was arrested again for marijuana use, but in an incomprehensible turn of events, he was paroled again just weeks later. With only new restrictions applied, authorities now believe that during this brief period of freedom, he committed gruesome, unsolved crimes. On July 6, 1996, 11-year-old Sammy Jo White and her 9-year-old half-sister, Carmen Cubias, disappeared after leaving the Crest Motel in Seattle. Their remains were found in Bothell, Washington, only in 1998, a case that remained permanently unsolved at the time. Duncan was also a suspect in another cold case murder in 1997. On April 4, 1997, 10-year-old Anthony Martinez was kidnapped in Beaumont, California, after being lured by a strange man asking for help finding a lost cat. The abductor threatened Martinez with a knife and forced him into his car. The boy's body was found 2 weeks later in Indio. He had been sexually assaulted and bound with duct tape. Investigators at the time secured a composite sketch and fingerprints of the suspect, but failed to identify the perpetrator. Both cases are highly likely to have been committed by Duncan while he was on parole. In 1997, Duncan was arrested in Missouri and sent back to prison for violating his parole conditions. The system was unaware that he was the man behind the terrible crimes he had committed, simply jailing him again for a parole violation. The road to Coeur d'Alene. On July 14, 2000, Duncan was released from prison for good behavior and moved to Fargo, North Dakota, but his criminal instinct resurfaced soon after his release. On July 3, 2004, he was charged with sexually assaulting 2 boys at a playground in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. On April 5, 2005, he appeared before a Becker County judge, and bail was set at $15,000. Duncan paid the bail with the help of a businessman he had met in Fargo. But this was a deception to secure an opportunity to leave prison. He immediately went into hiding and failed to appear in court. On June 1, a federal warrant was issued for his arrest. He became a fugitive, charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. At this point, Duncan was completely off society's radar. He also ran a personal website called The Fifth Nail to document his criminal activities. On this website, he likened himself to the fifth nail used in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, claiming to be an entity hidden and misunderstood by the world. He denied being a pedophile, attempting to rationalize his actions as a result of childhood abuse. While justifying his pathological psyche online, Duncan was secretly moving to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He was a fugitive sex offender, a dangerous individual filled with vengeance against society, and he was heading toward the Groene family home in May 2005. All of this background culminated in the tragedy that unfolded in Coeur d'Alene. In the next chapter, in May 2005, Joseph Duncan was a fugitive with a federal warrant out for his arrest on child molestation charges in Minnesota. He may have felt a false sense of security, knowing his past crimes in California and Washington remained unsolved. But his next actions would be characterized by unimaginable cruelty. He hid in the peaceful town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. On May 16, he broke into a home located on the outskirts of Coeur d'Alene Lake, committing an act that horrified the entire community. The crime scene and the missing children. When authorities arrived at the scene, the house was the site of a horrific multiple murder. Brenda Groene, 40, her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, 37, and Brenda's son, Slade Groene, 13, were found brutally murdered. Autopsies revealed that all three victims had died from blunt force trauma to the head and were bound with nylon zip ties. This indicated a carefully planned violent crime, not a simple robbery. But the police's horror didn't end there. In addition to the three victims inside the house, Brenda's two youngest children, Dylan Groene, 9, and Shasta Groene, 8, were missing. Authorities immediately issued an Amber Alert, suspecting a kidnapping. However, with no suspect and no clues, the fate of the two children was unknown. The night of terror. Shasta's testimony. The most horrifying developments in this case were revealed through the sole survivor, Shasta Groene, after Duncan's arrest. Her testimony vividly reconstructed the terror of that night. According to Shasta, her mother entered the sleeping siblings' room and woke them up, whispering that someone was in the house. The children went to the living room, where they saw Duncan, wearing black gloves and holding a gun. Duncan bound the hands of her mother's fiancé, and her brother Slade with nylon zip ties. Duncan then dragged Shasta and Dylan out onto the lawn to wait. Several muffled thuds echoed from inside the house. Shasta testified that she briefly saw her injured brother, Slade, staggering away from the front door. Duncan ultimately beat and murdered all three victims with a club before taking the young siblings and fleeing in a stolen red Jeep Cherokee. 47 days of hell in the wilderness. This escape was the beginning of a 47-day nightmare. Duncan drove the two children across state lines, deep into the Lolo National Forest in Montana. In this remote area, he set up a makeshift campsite, completely isolating the children from the outside world while controlling and torturing them. Shasta told investigators that for 6 weeks, Duncan subjected her and Dylan to repeated sexual abuse and torture. Duncan intensified the psychological terror by calmly telling the children he had beaten their family to death with a hammer. The isolated camp in the woods was a hell where horrific abuse and the struggle for survival coexisted. Duncan drove the children for long periods, moving between at least 2 different campsites to evade detection. The most tragic event during the abduction was the murder of Dylan Groene. Shasta personally recounted the details of Dylan's death to investigators. Duncan initially claimed that Dylan's death was an accident, saying that a shotgun had fired and hit Dylan in the abdomen while he was rummaging through a clear plastic container where the gun was stored. However, Shasta's subsequent testimony clearly exposed Duncan's cruelty. As Dylan screamed in agony, Duncan aimed the shotgun at Dylan's head, but it didn't fire the first time. Even as Dylan begged him not to kill him, Duncan reloaded the gun, put it back to the boy's head, and pulled the trigger, killing Dylan instantly. This brutal act of murder is believed to have occurred around late June, just before Dylan's 10th birthday. After killing Dylan, Shasta testified that Duncan started crying, claiming he had killed the boy to put him out of his misery. Dylan's body was abandoned there. A miraculous rescue. Shasta's nightmare continued even after Dylan's death. She was under Duncan's complete control, and the camp in the woods became even more isolated. Amidst the grief of losing Dylan and the ongoing abuse, Shasta almost died. She stated that Duncan forced her to choose between strangulation or execution by gunshot, and when she chose strangulation, he began to choke her with a rope. Just as Shasta was on the verge of suffocating, she begged him to stop, calling him by his nickname, Jet. Duncan finally let go. He asked Shasta if she wanted to see her mother, and when she said yes, he finally prepared to return to Coeur d'Alene. The case took a dramatic turn on the morning of July 2, 2005. 47 days after the kidnapping, Duncan stopped at a Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene with Shasta. A waitress, the manager, and 2 customers immediately recognized Shasta from the news reports. Their calm quick thinking saved Shasta. They discreetly called the police without alerting Duncan and stalled him to buy time. When officers arrived, Duncan was arrested without resistance, and Shasta was finally rescued. She was immediately taken for medical treatment, and the focus of the investigation shifted to finding Dylan. Police asked the public for tips regarding the stolen red Jeep Cherokee, with Missouri license plates, that Duncan was driving at the time of his arrest, a car he had rented in Minnesota and never returned. Thanks to tips from witnesses, investigators discovered Dylan Groone's remains at a remote campsite in the Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana. Thus, the 47-day ordeal ended with the tragic death of Dylan and the dramatic survival of Shasta. This was the horrific sequence of events that Joseph Duncan perpetrated in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The most awful tragedy of the 47-day nightmare unfolded deep in the Lolo National Forest in Montana. The death of 9-year-old Dylan Groene. Less than a month after the abduction, Dylan was brutally murdered by Joseph Duncan. Duncan later tried to justify the killing to investigators, claiming he did it to put Dylan out of his misery, attempting to frame it as an act of mercy. He argued that Dylan was suffering from sexual abuse and was critically wounded in a gun accident, so he shot him to relieve the pain. However, the testimony of the sole witness and survivor, Shasta Groene, clearly exposed Duncan's claims as a vicious lie. The murder and abandonment. Shasta had a vivid memory of Dylan's murder. Duncan sexually abused Dylan, and when the boy screamed, Duncan used a shotgun to kill him. Dylan's death was the result of cruel and shocking violence, and afterward, Duncan abandoned Dylan's body in a remote spot in the Montana National Forest. The remains of the 9-year-old boy were left deep in the woods by his abductor, a tragic event that left an indelible scar on Shasta. Not only did she witness her brother's death, but she then had to endure Duncan's abuse and psychological manipulation alone. Following Dylan's death, Shasta was subjected to even more extreme isolation and fear. Duncan was her sole protector and abuser, forcing Shasta to rely on him for survival. Duncan frequently moved the camp to evade detection, and Shasta had to endure endless long drives and life in the forest. He forced her to call him by the nickname Jet, attempting to build a sort of twisted relationship. Duncan also boasted to Shasta about other unsolved murders he had committed, demonstrating his wicked power. This strongly hinted that Shasta's testimony would later become the critical clue to solving his past crimes. Survival against all odds. One night, Duncan's madness reached its peak. He forced Shasta to choose between two methods of death: strangulation or execution by gunshot, putting her on the edge between life and death. Shasta chose strangulation, and Duncan began to choke her with a rope. In fear and agony, Shasta begged him to stop, calling him by his nickname, Jet. Duncan finally released the rope just before she suffocated, narrowly saving Shasta's life. This experience undoubtedly left deep trauma, but it must have also hardened her will to survive. After this incident, Duncan asked Shasta if she wanted to see her mother, and when Shasta said yes, he finally prepared to return to Coeur d'Alene. Duncan likely believed Shasta's psychological resistance was broken, or perhaps felt he needed to return to the city to leave a record of his criminal acts. The Denny's rescue. On the 47th day of the abduction, in the early morning hours of July 2, 2005, a light of salvation finally shone. Duncan took Shasta to a Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. While Duncan was in the restroom, Shasta sat alone at the table. At that moment, waitress Charlene Fairchild, another employee, and a few customers immediately recognized Shasta from the missing child photos broadcast on TV and in the media. Their quick thinking and courage completely changed the fate of the case. Charlene calmly approached Shasta and asked her name. Shasta initially replied, "I'm not Shasta Groene," but soon revealed her real name and age. The employees acted covertly so Duncan wouldn't notice. The manager immediately made an emergency call to alert the police, and other staff members stalled Duncan so he wouldn't leave the restaurant. Their report to the police was clear: the suspect who kidnapped the two children is in our restaurant. Officers immediately raced to the scene. When the police arrived, Duncan was arrested on the spot without resistance. His car was filled with a pistol, ammunition, and zip ties, items presumed to have been used in the crimes. Shasta was immediately taken to the hospital for treatment and counseling. She had made a dramatic escape from 47 days of hell and was finally reunited with her father, who had been desperately searching for her. News of her rescue brought a wave of relief across the nation. However, the police investigation didn't stop there. The stolen red Jeep Cherokee with Missouri license plates that Duncan was driving at the time of his arrest became the crucial clue to finding Dylan's whereabouts. Tracking the car's movements, investigators finally discovered Dylan Groone's remains deep in the Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana. This confirmed Dylan's death, bringing the complex crisis of brutal murder, kidnapping, and dramatic survival to a close. Duncan's arrest signaled the climactic moment that would help solve 3 other cold case murders. Viewers, on the morning of July 2, 2005, When Joseph Duncan was arrested at the Denny's restaurant in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, the police didn't just catch one fugitive sex offender. They apprehended a serial killer who held the puzzle pieces to numerous cold case, child disappearances and murders across North America. Duncan's arrest immediately led to a massive investigation by the Idaho State Prosecutor's Office. The shocking confession in the bargain. Immediately following his arrest, Duncan displayed a surprisingly calm and calculated demeanor during questioning. He immediately confessed to the horrific murders and abduction of the Groene family, including the murder of Dylan. His confession was consistent with the specific testimony of Shasta Groene and the evidence found at the scene, particularly the zip ties, firearms, and video camera seized from his vehicle. Duncan was already aware he faced the death penalty, and he attempted to use this as a bargaining chip. He offered to confess to his other crimes to the federal government in exchange for accepting the death sentence and waiving his right to appeal. This offer, while shocking, was an unmissable opportunity for investigators. The cold cases he held the key to had remained unsolved for years, causing indelible pain to the victims' families. Thanks to Duncan's confession, 3 notorious cold cases finally faced justice. The first was the 1996 disappearance and murder of sisters Sammy Jo White, 11, and Carmen Cubias, 9, in Tacoma, Washington. Duncan confessed to kidnapping and killing the 2 girls and disposing of their bodies, which coincided with the period he was staying in Washington after his 1994 parole. The second was the 1997 murder of 10-year-old Anthony Martinez in California. Duncan confessed to luring, kidnapping, and killing the boy. Duncan's confessions to these 3 cold cases confirmed that his criminal spree was not a localized crime, but a widespread serial killing operation. The trials and sentences. In 2008, the trial for the Groene family murders and abduction began in Idaho federal court. As part of an agreement with federal prosecutors, Duncan pleaded guilty to the 3 adult murders and the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of the 2 children. This trial gained further notoriety due to his bizarre courtroom behavior. Duncan insisted on representing himself and attempted to rationalize his actions by referencing the content of his The Fifth Nail website, where he documented his crimes. He personally narrated the gruesome details of his crimes in court, inflicting yet another round of cruel pain on the victims' families. In August 2008, the jury sentenced Duncan to death. This was the final legal judgment for the horrific sacrifices of the Groene family. Duncan honored his promise to waive his right to appeal this verdict, concluding the legal proceedings in Idaho. However, the judgment for his past crimes was now carried over to state courts. In 2009, Duncan appeared in Riverside County Court in California and pleaded guilty to the murder of Anthony Martinez. The California court sentenced Duncan to death. Subsequently, in 2011, he was transferred to a Washington state court and pleaded guilty to the murders of sisters Sammy Jo White and Carmen Cubias. The Washington court sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences. Through this series of trials, Joseph Duncan was convicted of a total of 7 murders, including 1 death sentence in federal court, 1 death sentence in state court, and 2 life sentences. His serial killing spree was legally concluded, and his victims finally found justice after decades. Duncan's trial process served as a stark example of the many loopholes in the American justice system. Regarding the monitoring and punishment of sex offenders, Duncan was incarcerated on death row at the Federal Correctional Complex, Terre Haute, in Indiana. His arrest and trial left an indelible trauma on Dylan and Shasta, but thanks to Shasta's brave testimony, Duncan could no longer harm innocent lives. Shasta Groene survived this terrible experience, growing into a resilient survivor, and her testimony was crucial in bringing Duncan to justice. Joseph Duncan died of natural causes in the federal prison on March 28, 2021. His death marked the end of one of the most notorious serial killers, but the pain and lessons left by his crimes are permanently etched into the history of American jurisprudence. While Joseph Duncan's reign of terror ended, his legacy has had a profound and wide-reaching impact, from the peaceful town of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, to U.S. courtrooms and the nationwide sex offender tracking system. The tragedy of Dylan and Shasta Groene exposed vulnerabilities in American society, and their story sparked systemic change. This final chapter highlights the courageous recovery of survivor Shasta Groene and the efforts to reform the system, Shasta's resilience and a survivor's voice. After enduring 47 days in hell, Shasta Groene was reunited with her father and immediately began her journey of treatment and recovery. The physical and psychological trauma inflicted on the 8-year-old girl was unimaginable. Yet, Shasta demonstrated incredible resilience. She focused on her recovery, protected from public scrutiny. Her story became a national symbol of sorrow, but also of hope. Shasta's recovery was more than mere survival. It was the triumph of the resilient human spirit over Duncan's darkness. As she got older, She didn't hide her experience, speaking out in interviews to give other victims the courage to share their own stories. As the sole witness to the kidnapping and murders, Shasta played a crucial role in the police investigation and courtroom testimony. Her courage was particularly instrumental in solving Duncan's other cold cases, finally bringing justice to other victim families who had been waiting for decades. As an adult, Shasta has used her experience to help other survivors, transforming tragedy into a life of hope. Her life is powerful proof that trauma cannot completely destroy a person. Through continuous rehabilitation and therapy, she confronted her past and built a healthy future. Catalyst for systemic reform. The Duncan case triggered a major review of the U.S. sex offender registration and tracking system. Duncan had prior sex crime convictions in multiple states and was a federal fugitive with a warrant out of Minnesota. The fact that he could freely cross state lines and commit the most heinous crimes was a clear system failure. This case fueled the urgent need for better information sharing between state and federal agencies. The names Dylan and Shasta Groene became the focal point for demanding legislation to strengthen sex offender monitoring. The fact that no one was able to stop or locate Duncan, as he disregarded a federal warrant and drove from Minnesota to Idaho, was a national embarrassment. Following the incident, the U.S. Congress and various state governments implemented numerous legislative measures to track sex offenders. The efficiency of the Amber Alert system was re-evaluated, and there was a stronger push for creating a federal system to integrate and share sex offender information in real time. Legal procedures were put in place to ensure immediate and powerful responses when high-risk sex offenders like Duncan fail to register a change of address or violate parole conditions. This case became a critical turning point, fundamentally changing policies aimed at reducing sex offender recidivism and protecting children. Awareness was also raised about online platforms, like the Fifth Nail website, which Duncan used to document his criminal acts. The fight for justice and healing. Stephen Groene, the children's father, raised Shasta after the tragedy while also becoming a vocal advocate for crime victims' rights. He fought until justice was delivered for his 3 lost children and his rescued daughter, Shasta. Stephen attended court throughout the entire trial process, which spanned courts in California and Washington. After Duncan's arrest, representing the victims' families, his dedicated efforts were vital in securing guilty verdicts for all of Duncan's crimes and ensuring he received the appropriate punishment, the death penalty. Other victims' families were also able to resolve decades of grief and unanswered questions through Duncan's capture. The families of Sammy Jo White and Carmen Cubias, and the family of Anthony Martinez, finally learned their children's final whereabouts through Duncan's confession, taking the first step out of a long tunnel of pain. Joseph Duncan's crimes are recorded as one of the darkest chapters in U.S. criminal history. However, the true legacy of this case is not his cruelty, but the courage of Shasta Groene, who overcame it all, the judicial system changes spurred by her testimony, and the resilience of the families who endured and rebuilt their lives. Duncan died in prison in 2021, but the stories of his victims will continue to live on, raising awareness and contributing to a safer society. This documentary is not just the story of a serial killer, it is the story of the Groene family and Shasta's survival, and proof of how individual courage can bring about justice when the system fails. By remembering this case, we must reinforce our social safety nets so that figures like Duncan can no longer hide in the shadows and commit crimes. That concludes today's story. We'll be back tomorrow with a new case and mystery. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching.